this brings us to our last part, which is about user-centric experimentation. And I've also, I think, shown this slide a bit early on. At some point, very early in the experiment, you will need to be clear if you want to involve any users in the experiment or not. And obviously, there are different ways of, involving them. But for instance, in our environment, in our testbed, what we usually have to do is we have to run through some ethics approval process in our university. So let's say, imagine you would like to run an experiment in our lab, in our testbed, which will involve maybe like some staff or students who participate in the experiment. Could be, for instance, like carrying a mobile device around with them, or just basically monitoring information from the desks and doing something with this type of information. We would really go through an entire process of actually, first of all, ethically approving it, and then obviously then, to a certain extent as well, recruiting participants that are actually volunteers, that are actually willing to be part of the experiment, and obviously all these stages will influence at the end the design of the experiment again. So on one side, there are things that you need to consider about, let's say, so what is the role of the users in your experiment? So what should be the profile, for instance? Is the environment where I want to run actually an adequate environment for it or not? And obviously, how well these users have to be involved in the experiment. So on one side, if it's just like, passively observing some of the, let's say, actions they do or some features from their environment, maybe the users are, feel less inhibited in being part of it. If it's something where they have to actively provide you with feedback, or on the other side as well, maybe as well have some form of maybe user input in the experiment, or they have to carry something around. It could be more in their daily life activities. And then also they may not be necessarily wanting to be part of it. Or there are certain, let's say, inhibitors for them being part. And also on the other side as well is a level of risk that maybe they are exposed to. Maybe the action, let's say, a particular example, maybe actually from our test, but I can tell you is we were executing this SACOM experiment. This was a testbed funded by our project, but executed by a research team from Poland and Greece. And they wanted to give like soft actuation feedback to a user. So basically trying to give certain hints to the user and see if they would implement these actions. And the first experiment design, what they did was to actually have some form of flashing, blinking light on the desk. On one side, you can think, okay, if a light blinks and tells you something, doesn't sound that bad. But if you think about maybe flashing lights being able to cause epileptic fits, basically, then you can see actually it's something that is a risk that you expose other people to. And it could trigger maybe a fit, or it could actually trigger also, if it's like somewhere well visible in an office, also it could affect other participants in the environment. So people who are actually not part of the experiment but just tend to work in it. So these kind of things you have to really carefully consider when you design an experiment involving users. So, and also to understand what kind of impact this may have, not only on the people who are part of it, but also who are not part of it. Then also, if you design an experiment, you need to also realistically dimension it. So how many users do you need? How long will it run? And also what type of data or whatever I want to capture. So these are things, apart from the other things that we talked about, you need to consider into your experimentation design. And obviously, these two again are kind of interrelated. The more users you need for an experiment, the more difficult it may be to manage for yourself. And also, how likely are you actually able to recruit so many participants? Let's say if you start with a very unrealistic goal, and you need this for let's say for some statistical significance, you may end up at the end, after going through ethics approval, after going through recruitment process, you don't just get to these numbers. So, you know, maybe you have to scrap your experiment altogether. And so these kind of things you have to really manage your expectations carefully. Yeah? So obviously a key part is that you have volunteers being part of your experiments. Maybe there may be some circumstances where it may be advisable or it may be justifiable that users actually are not informed. But these are very specific cases where really the behavior or whatever you want to study otherwise will maybe be disturbed by the knowledge of them knowing it. Yeah? And obviously these are very ethically touchy things. Yeah? This is something that needs to be kind of properly managed and it needs proper approval. I mean, like any other thing that you do. But often you will want to have volunteers or want to have people participating in the experiment that are actually eager to engage, that are interested, they want to be part of it and help to solve something bigger. And I think these are the type of users that you want. And something that you need to consider is your experiment has to be interesting. Yeah. So and I think it's the best motivation, self-drive, rather than trying to put other incentives for them to be part of it. Like, for instance, some monetary incentives or whatever. And obviously, so you need to think what will motivate the user to be part of it. And obviously, you need to also see if the experiment that you want to carry out causes inconvenience or certain risk for them. They are less likely to be part of it. You know, just assess by yourself. Would you be willing to do it? Would you want to carry around an intrusive device for 24/7 for the next month or so? I mean, it can change your ways of working and so on. And it's a tricky thing, so you need to kind of carefully design. And obviously, maybe for these kind of cases, you need to incentivize users in addition and so on. And of course, it's always easy if you have a lot of money to say, look, I just buy my users. So let's say we would say each computer science student will get an iPad or this or that. You quickly get the numbers that you want, but is it ethical? It's another consideration that you have to take into account. So you have to be careful with the rewards that you also give for participation. And this is all part of the ethics review at the end when you submit a proposal. And also think about incentives could be not just material, it could be like, you know, manifold. So it's not about financial stuff always, but it's just like about maybe creating competition even around the experiment where users can then, you know, be engaged in and, you know, kind of like, you know, rank them or whatever. So there are different ways of incentivizing users being part or offering them a benefit. I mean, ideally the experiment offers them something that is beneficial to them. So there are different things to take into consideration. So something also quite useful is, I mean, it's a bit boring table, but this is just taken from a typical FP7 proposal. There's section 4, D4 of a proposal, which is called ethics. So you usually have a lot of space to write about, you know, your research ideas and all the how you implement them, what's the impact, and so on. But there's a small part at the end as well that has a few questions that you need to answer and to identify if your research has potentially ethical implications that have to be taken into consideration. And they're like informed consent-based, biological, privacy-based. It's about research in animals, about maybe also research that are carried out in countries which are not considered maybe to be like EU-affiliated countries where certain research maybe should not be carried out. Things about maybe abusing research in military contexts like dual use, or also research that involves some certain physical implants in people. And maybe the most common that you will kind of come across if you run an experiment in the IoT world could be implants. Some people work on this body sensor network stuff, but let's say it's maybe about informed consent and privacy. And you can see here, again here, does this proposal involve children, patients, so people who are not able to make a decision upon themselves. So, does have people actually not given consent to it, and also even about healthy volunteers and so on. So there are different things that you have to look at, and also things about data. So is it any data that is sensitive, that is captured through the experiment? and then it's important how you handle it inside of your experiment. And also has actually involves tracking of the people, of the location, or what they do. So this type of stuff you will most likely come across if you do some user-centric IoT experimentation, and you need to have an answer for it. So in our university itself, we have an ethics committee, and they have some form of guidelines as well that you have to kind of answer if you want to do user-centric experimentation. And so similar to this EU, so these are the main things. So things related to the health and safety of someone, so be it the physical health and safety, but also be mental health and safety. And maybe if you, for instance, have an experiment where you have to drive from the car at the same time give some IoT input, that could expose you to a certain risk, right? So, and likewise, for a lot of medical or clinical research or on medication and so on, health and safety could be actually a major concern. So these things need to be kind of well understood and formulated. Likewise, there are things which look at concerns of specific groups of participants. So like, for instance, undergraduate students, children that are underage, prisoners or young offenders, so people who are kind of in a very, let's say, strict environment or have certain pressure or external pressures. And also something that they look at is basically, is this actually carried out by outside our organization? And let's say if you want to use our testbeds, and you want to involve our testbed with some experiments with some real people in our place, you will be falling to this category. And then also there's basically other concerns that relate basically to your proposed research that could deal with like the privacy against the sensitive data being collected, things about consent or not given, about the financial rewards or payments that you want to give, and so on. Also basically things that examines working practice inside our organization and could lead to certain tensions inside of our organization. And also, hopefully this will not be part of your research, but about any donation of bodily material, organs and stuff like this. But these are all like, let's say, things that raise quite ethical questions, and if your research touches any of these points, you will have to write an ethics proposal, like for approval by the ethics committee. So the ethics committee is there. It's like a board that organizations have. They are composed of, let's say, more senior or experienced members or advisors that come often from different disciplines. And their role is there to protect the ethical integrity of the research that you want to carry on. And usually they would look at your proposal and they would basically look at from the light from ethical issues, identify if there are certain issues. But they're not there just to kind of, say, oh, your research is unethical, rubbish, forget about it. But they will try to give you feedback as well. So it's like a positive thing. It's like a review instance. It gives you some feedback and it says, okay, look, we want more clarification here, or how would you protect this case? Or, maybe they give you even ideas of how you can maybe design certain aspects so they would not, cause any ethical issues. So it's something that is quite valuable as well. So this board is there an instance to give you feedback. And in our university we have like some boards that for specific research faculties, and also a board overall for the university which covers any sorts of other things. For instance, research that we've been carrying out so far was the overall ethics board. The medical or biological department will have more often this type of experiments, so they have a specific board for it. Then, obviously, this means apart from designing your experiment, doing your code and whatever you want, so the parts that we discussed earlier, getting this approval is already a quite intensive process. So you will have to start well with the planning. You have to think of at least 4 weeks of a review cycle, so until you submit something and get back. So these boards usually meet once a month. So that's why I say 4 weeks until the next time they can give you feedback. And obviously, my experience is you will always get some comments back. So don't expect a perfect submission at the beginning. So at least allow for one cycle to be carried out. Usually if it's a minor change, you get quick feedback as well, but 6 weeks or something like this is something that you have to consider. Then also be prepared for a lot of paperwork. So there's a cover letter, a cover sheet, and a protocol. It's like a general document with questions that you have to fill out. But then you want to also provide annexes to it that describe actually your experiment in more detail. What is it about? That will describe any interactions that you will have with them, like emails that you want to send to them, the incentives that you want to use to get them engaged, the informed consent form as well that you will give to them maybe if you want them to give informed consent. It will also give things like if you want to have conduct interviews with them, all the questionnaires you have to prepare, everything in advance. And all this together will be considered by the ethics board. And it could be easy, like 20, 30, 40 pages, depending on the nature of the experiment. So it's an intensive process. And obviously try to use a language when you prepare those that are easily understandable, because don't expect those guys to be, experts in your field. They aren't. Yeah? So try to explain it in a way that someone from a social science background will understand it. Yeah? And that is also something that contributes to the success of that they understand your research. So it avoids maybe unnecessary cycles. Then recruitment. So once you, let's say, you passed all this and you got approval from the ethics board and everything is fine, you're not done yet. Now you need to somehow reach into your experiment. So obviously, hopefully you have an experiment that is interesting, that has something to offer for them, or that at least invokes a feeling that they think it's an interesting thing I want to be part of. And so you then need to engage with them, and there are many ways to engaging with them, but try to stick to the communications that you actually also promised in your ethics approval. So let's say if you said, okay, I will just contact them via email, and I will just offer the no, let's say, a reward for participation. You cannot suddenly just come and make like a full-blown media campaign, to recruit them and then promise them the world. Yeah. So your experiments may be subject to audits, and they will be able to catch, and then you may have troubles. Yeah. So there's things that you have to consider, and there's all sorts of stuff. We've used things like email announcements, obviously, maybe some social media stuff you share on Facebook, or something about an upcoming experiment. Create an information pack that you can attach to an email, send around so people understand what's happening. Organize information events physically, so to be able to recruit participants. And obviously also have a kickoff meeting where, last chance people can join, but also like where you explain them what is it about and so on. And obviously, ideally at some point you will have them registering for it and you will get their informed consent. It's often like a form just signed that they, understand about this experiment, and often in an informed consent form as well, you would also say that even if they signed and are part of it, they can at any point in time decide to leave, and there's no implications on it whatsoever. So this type of stuff is something that has to be part. Now, as well, another step is site preparation. So you can't expect that everything will work out of the box and the testbed offers you whatever you need right away. So you will have to maybe, first of all, understand better the external factors. If you want to observe user behavior, you need to understand better if, let's say, the devices that you've deployed actually capture what they should capture. Yeah. So, for instance, we had some experiments where we used a motion sensor on the desk of a participant to detect the presence of a participant. But this motion sensor can be also triggered by other participants walking past, and so on and so on. So it really depends on where the desk is located, how it is. You have certain confidence to be able to tell and so on. And so you need to inspect the environment for this. And maybe design things around to make this more reliable. Also, experiment could have an influence on non-experimenters. Like if it's like an acoustic feedback that you give or anything that is in an office, others would hear. So these things you need to be carefully considering. And also try to, if you need to deploy additional sensors, so it may be that our testbed doesn't offer you all things. Maybe you need to have, for some cases, additional sensors to resolve ambiguity. Again, here you need to basically deploy devices while people are working and try to minimize the impact on them. You know, this is something that you need to carefully look at this. And also you may want to, maybe if you do experiments with smartphones, you may want to instrument first the phone with some code and things like this. It's all part of this process with people, so it's a long way. And then obviously try to verify your experimental setup before you actually start the experiment. It's also something quite important to understand. Because if you have any errors or mistakes and your experiment is already running, maybe you have just this one opportunity and that's it. And you cannot just ask for the people to be one month longer involved or things like this. So it's because you have to fix some bug in your code. So this is really something that you have to be very careful and prepare in advance for this. So two more things, and I think then we got it we got it done for today. So one of them is basically the kickoff. So obviously, although some people you have registrations of 20 people or 30 people, and you have an official kickoff meeting, and you will explain the kickoff exactly how they have to behave and stuff. Don't expect everyone to attend and show up because everyone has a busy calendar. So try to offer them an opportunity to come, maybe on a one-to-one session as well, to learn about it. If it's important for you if you to brief them about how to be involved in the experiment. And also try to be as clear as possible with expectations. Yeah? Some users are, they think, okay, it's just putting one let's say, feedback in a day is fine, but suddenly maybe what they think is just feedbacking one thing in a day, but sometimes maybe the experiment triggers 10 or 20 such incidents. Suddenly they feel overwhelmed by this, and it's too intrusive for their daily activities. So try to be as honest and as clear as possible. Yeah? It's going to save you a lot of problems later. And also try to provide adequate training if they need to do certain actions in your experiment. So that's also important. And for instance, if you have an experiment with 50 people, you want to organize a kickoff meeting for 2 hours, you have to not think about that you just take 2 hours of the time, but you actually take 2 hours for 50 people, which is 100 hours for an organization. Yeah? So be kind of careful and respect as well, people's time in an organization, and also when you schedule and things like this. So these are just some experiences that we got. Then, I think that's the most important thing, the human factor. So while technology usually behaves as it should behave, people don't. and please be prepared for anything. Yeah. So on one side, people may not have the engagement you want to envision, or have a lack of interest, or they may just engage at the beginning, but at the end they kind of get bored about it, and they don't take it serious anymore. Also, I'm not saying that everyone, certain things don't happen because people are not motivated, but maybe also they forget things to do. So if it requires you to, let's say, your experiment requires you to take a note every hour of what you did or whatever, people may just forget about it, or maybe, busy with something else. So your data will start getting incomplete. Also, some people may actually deliberately not say much. They oppose the experiment, but let's say they want to temper deliberately with the experiment because they don't think it is something that is useful to them. Or temper with your infrastructure. So we had really, really big problems in the beginning. People disconnecting nodes in our testbed, moving them around and things like this. And you just discover this later, your data becomes a mess and so on. It's, if you're deploying in a testbed that is together with people, that is an issue. And think of people also not being available for a month. Yeah, maybe your experiment wants to have data for them over an entire month, but people will be sick, people will be on holiday, people will have to go for a business trip and so on. So all these factors you need to understand will have impact as well on the quality of data that you will have. Then ideally is you could design an experiment such as you can detect such unexpected situation in order to preserve the quality of data. And it is very difficult usually to do. So, I mean, some errors can be detected, some maybe not. Like for instance, we had an experiment where people had to carry around a device, like put a mobile phone in a pocket and have a device around the neck in order to record the real movement patterns. But people will just maybe forget them on the desk, or they'll just don't take them, or just take one device, not the other. So how can you verify actually a user has taken the device? And the behavior that you've seen is one that actually the user was sitting on the desk all the time but didn't move around. So you may want to maybe look at accelerometers in your phone as an example to measure actually if the phone is moving or not, and so on, to validate this in addition. So there are a lot of complex things that have to be taken into account, and it makes it difficult to have really quality data that you can say is a true baseline of what you want to measure. And finally, also manage risks adequately. So experiments will require some form of risk management because people are involved. And you need to have contingency plans ready. Maybe also you may need to have even insurance cover from your organization just in case something happens. These are all things that you have to take into account. Okay, that's the final one. Final one. So, yeah. Respect the lunch. Okay, the final bit is about, so look at, for instance, that you have enough feedback channels for experiments so that people can give you if things don't go bad, or they can contact you if they are uncertain about things. Make sure as well that you're always helpful and respecting them. Often they are doing you a favor, not you them. So you have to understand this kind of relationship. And this will have an impact as well on how motivated they are and your data quality. Also, anonymity often requires also more complicated matters. So maybe there's just one person who can manage the data, and maybe data is anonymized. And then if something goes bad, tracking this back requires some coordination between people in your organization and the experimentation team. That is also an overhead that you have to take into account. And obviously, you may want to have interviews before, in the middle, after. This type of stuff needs to be arranged, managed, and so on. So it's just like a brief overview of all the factors that are also to be taken into account when you do human-centric experiments. And I know it's by far not all, but I hope a few experiences that are helpful if you want to do something in this space. Okay, thank you, Sergeant.